The sun is up, the day is wide open, and life still has so much to give. Every laugh, every step, every shared moment says the story is still unfolding beautifully. You are not finished yet. Your story continues.
Most people think life follows a straight line. Education, career, retirement. But for many, that line changes. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, and sometimes by a moment they never expected. This is Not Finished Yet, a podcast about people who started again and discovered their most interesting chapter was still ahead. Each episode shares real stories of reinvention, the risks, the decisions, and what it actually takes to build something new later in life. Because the truth is, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. Can I just add that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of any organisations, employers, or partners connected to them. Before we start, a quick note. A large number of people who listen to the podcast haven't yet subscribed. If you find these conversations valuable, hit subscribe or follow on your platform. It makes a huge difference and helps us keep sharing these stories. Now, let's get into this week's story. Brilliant. Well, we'll get straight into it, shall we? Now that we've introduced ourselves. Thank you very much for coming on board. Most people don't lose direction at once, they drift. Today's guest, Cynthia, or Dr. Cynthia, is a leading powerful conversation around the hidden problem, how high-performing individuals and organisations gradually lose alignment, not because they fail, but because they stopped examining where they're headed. Dr. Cynthia is a human capital strategist, executive coach and best-selling author who brings over 30 years of experience working with leaders at the highest level of business. So you've created a system which we'd like to create on called the 7-minute pivot, a simple daily practice designed to help you shift from thinking to action, one decision at a time. If you've ever felt successful on the outside but sensed something was off, this is a conversation we're going to want to lean into, Dr. Cynthia. So welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
It's so good to be with you this morning.
Brilliant. So let's get straight into it. Great to have you on the show. For people hearing from you for the first time, especially over in the UK, how do you describe the work you do today?
Yeah, so I focus on helping individuals get out of their own way so that they can reach their highest point of potential. And I work individually as an executive coach. I work with organizations that are wanting to ensure they've got the best, most talented teams. And then I spend time writing and keynoting on the side. So yeah, it's all about helping individuals really live into their biggest, best potential.
So with over 30 years, if you don't mind me saying, of experience at the C-suite level,
Yeah.
what has that journey taught you about ambition, leadership and direction?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think a couple things, and I've done a lot of research specifically around women, so the women listening, but that's not to isolate or set aside men. I often say we need to steal a page out of your playbook, because men, for the most part, are raised to be ambitious, to raise their hand, to put themselves out there, and oftentimes, really, we studied women around the globe. That they're more spoken to put your head down, work hard, and wait for good things to happen. But the biggest thing that I have found, regardless, when it comes to ambition and climbing the proverbial corporate ladder, is that oftentimes we lose parts of ourselves. We drift in various areas of our life, and so we might be pouring everything into our career. And trying to, follow that ambition. And there are times where we sacrifice our health or we sacrifice relationships for that goal. And so I think it can be very rewarding, very self-actualizing. But at the end of the day, we have to be careful that we're keeping all parts of our joy and human flourishing in healthy equilibrium.
Yeah. So was there a moment in your own life or career that you realised the drift was real, or was it just for other people, but
No,
for you too?
no, I've had my own drift more than I, probably care to admit. I stayed in a marriage longer than I should have. I stayed in jobs longer than I should have, where I had really graduated, I like to say. I was ready to move on, but the comfort maybe was there. It was easier to stay. Um, I think that I sacrificed, in some cases, relationships for ambition, not realizing that you can have both if you don't put your energy in the right places. Um, After 30 plus years in corporate, going out on my own, kind of looking back, I realized, I haven't invested in relationships nearly outside of my professional setting, nearly as much as I wished I had. And that's drift. I like to say that sometimes drift is avoidant. It's we're avoiding something we don't want to deal with, so we just put it on autopilot. Sometimes it's incremental. It's that toxic boss or that toxic situation, that a situation comes up and you deal with it in the moment and then you sort of forget about it and move on, and then another situation comes up and you deal with it and move on, and we fail to sort of pull up to 50,000 feet and say there's a pattern here. And sometimes it's complacent drift. Sometimes it's just not on our radar. It's suddenly we look up and we've gained 30 pounds because we've just been so focused in other areas of our life. We've not paid attention to our health, right? So for me, I've experienced all of those things. Um, and it's about not being perfect. It's about being aware.
So a couple of things. I was going to ask about what you meant by drift, but you've explained it quite well there. But a couple of things then on that. Why is drift so dangerous, especially for high performers, and why do you believe so many successful people can look like they're doing well on the outside, but internally they feel disconnected and off course?
Yeah, because we're not quitters, right? Type A, ambitious, talented people that have a lot of drive and energy are going to put their all into something. And usually the areas that we drift are the areas that are most important to our human flourishing, but from the outside appear successful. So I'll give you a couple examples. It's the person in their job that really doesn't love what they're doing. And they're working longer hours, they're exhausted, they don't feel aligned with the job or the culture, but they keep showing up, they keep putting it in because they're not going to give up, they're not a quitter, and if they're going to do something, and they're going to do it with their all. Rather than pausing and saying, is there a pattern or a theme here that really would compel me to go do something else? Or the writings on the wall. I think there's so many people that have been laid off or displaced recently. And I'm not saying everyone saw the signs, but oftentimes, if we're really looking back and being, sort of reflective, there's something that sort of suggests that things may be off with our alignment with the role, off with the value that others perceive. And that's not an indictment of us or the person listening. It just may mean it's time to move on. But sometimes we sort of overstay our welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Because I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. But does it happen suddenly, or is it something much quieter than that? Does it just creep up on you?
I think
What
it
are the early
depends.
warning signs?
Yeah, I think it depends. So, and we'll talk about the 7-minute pivot because that's really how you identify the warning signs. But typically the warning signs are listen to your body. And I know that sounds a little woo woo maybe, but here's the thing. Your body tells on you. If if going into work gives you a pit in your stomach on Sunday nights, or if you're dealing with chronic headaches, or you're struggling to sleep, or you're gaining weight or losing weight, right? What is it when you are in that relationship? What is it about your finances? What is it about your job? What is it about having a connection to your sense of purpose? I mean, I work with people that they've just lost sight of their true north. They just, they're sort of, it's rinse and repeat. So the first thing I always tell people is check in because your body tells on you. And that's the very first place to start, is that something feels off. But to your point, does it sneak up on you? I was in a very toxic, emotionally abusive relationship for 5 years. And I always say to people, you think a smart, educated, successful woman on the outside, how does that happen? Well, it happens for a whole lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is avoidant drift, right? It's that it's so difficult to deal with and confront that it's just easier to go along to get along. And that's why I got my PhD. I put all of my effort and energy into going back to school. And I'm happy that I, have the academics to make up for that time of that difficult relationship. But I could have done both. I could have gotten my PhD and gotten a few more years of my life back.
Yeah. So do you think that people confuse drift perhaps with burnout,
Yes.
boredom, or even failure?
100%. 100%. I believe that we call it burnout. And I believe that burnout comes from, let's keep it in the business setting. You're burned out, but why are you burned out? Are you able to bring your full talent to work every day? Are you able to show up and do what you are naturally born to do, right? There's a lot of things we can do. Gun to my head, I can do a lot of things. Is it the things that bring me joy? Is it the things I do with excellence? Maybe not. And so when people are working in these toxic cultures, for difficult bosses, or simply in a role that doesn't let you live into your best talent, that feels like burnout, right? And we let it go on because we create these thoughts in our head that it's just what's expected. I don't feel like I have another option. We often feel, I say, people say they're stuck. Here's the challenge with being stuck. Stuck implies that you're not moving. Reality is we're always moving, right? So staying in a job because you feel stuck isn't that you're not moving. We live in time and space. Days are going by, months are going by, in some cases, years are going by. And so you're moving, you're just not moving with the discipline of the direction that you're choosing.
Yeah.
And the reality is you can do both. I coach people all the time on start working on your future today. I'm not saying to the person listening, go quit your job tomorrow. The person listening might be saying the rising cost of fuel, everything that's going on, Cynthia, I can't just go give my notice. I depend on my income. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is, what is your next? What is your aspirational next? Different job, promotion, different industry, work from home, start your own business, get a degree. What is your aspirational next? And start working on your future today. It doesn't mean it has to be an overhaul. It can be baby steps. But you don't kick the can down the road assuming that you're stuck.
So let's get into that then. You described drift through signals, patterns, and direction. Can you, walk us through a bit of a framework then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to say everybody can find 7 minutes, right? The first thing you hear when you talk to busy executives, busy people in general, and you tell them, hey, you need to stop drifting, and you need to work on your future today, right? That sounds great. But the first thing you get is, when am I supposed to have time for that? When do I fit that into the schedule? And I say 7 minutes. It's more than 5, it's less than 10. And here's the framework. I prefer in the morning. You can do this when you can find your 7 minutes. Doom scroll for 7 minutes less, Netflix binge for 7 fewer minutes, get up 7 minutes early. I like to do it in the morning. You literally set a timer. You set a 7-minute timer. You remove all distractions. I like to encourage people to go in a space that feels comfortable, that feels inviting, that you're not distracted. So probably not at your desk, right? Where you've got all the other competing things coming in. You're going to take a paper and pen, and there's neurological science behind why you want to write this stuff down. So this isn't so much journaling. It's not meditation. It's not prayer. All of those things can be supplemental. This is by itself. You set the timer, you remove distractions. You get out a pen and paper, and you think about what I call the 5 areas of human flourishing: my purpose, my prosperity, my peoples, my relationships, my potential, showing up, my talent, and my physiology. So my mental and physical health. And I'm going to do a quick review, and I'm going to say, where do I feel things are off? All right. So let's assume that it's in my potential. I feel like I'm not working in a job that I'm able to really deliver my full potential. And the first thing I'm going to do is, what are the signals? What is my body telling me? Gosh, I feel the Sunday blues right before the Monday work week. I get a pit in my stomach when I have to go meet with my boss, whatever it is. And you're just jotting those things down. You're giving validation to what is your body telling you. And then you're asking, the second thing is, what are the patterns? Do I always feel this way, or do I only feel this way last week because we had a really big important meeting? No, it's a pattern. It's every Monday, or it's always when I meet with my boss, or whatever it is. So you're looking for patterns. And then at the end of the 7 minutes, you're picking one small thing that you're going to choose to do that day to move yourself in a positive direction. So, because people think they have to overhaul their whole lives. It's like saying to somebody that never works out that you need to go be in the gym for an hour, 5 days a week, right? That's a lot. What I'm wanting you to do is say, I'm going to update my LinkedIn profile today. That's the one small thing I'm going to do. I'm going to spend my quote unquote lunch hour researching a certification, because I feel like if I had this certification, it would allow me to pivot in a different direction. My one small thing is, I'm going to call a mentor that I have in my life and talk to them and get their advice, right? One small thing. You just commit to that. But here's the thing, Mark, when you do that 7 minutes every day, that's 2,555 minutes in a year. That's 52 weeks that you're making these decisions. I mean, that cumulatively adds up and pivots you in a completely different direction than what we think is stuck. We think we're just sitting still, but really we're just getting further and further and further down the road and away from where we want to be.
So before we dig into the 5, back into the 5 areas I've got a question about, I just wanted to know, how does someone know the difference between being in like a tough season and actually heading in the wrong direction? How do we know?
It's a great question. I think that's where the daily practice comes in, right? Because that's where you're able to see the patterns or not see the patterns. You're reflecting on, when you're looking at patterns, you're saying, has it always been like this? Did I feel this way this time last year? Has it only been in the last 30 days? And again, your one small thing isn't abandonment. Let's use a relationship example to your point. Maybe your marriage is going through a tough time for whatever reason. This is a beautiful way place the 7-minute pivot, because you're saying, what are the patterns? Well, the patterns are really in the last 30 days. Patterns aren't in the last 3 years or 30 years or whatever it is. The patterns are recent. Okay, so what is it about that? And maybe your one small thing is to have that conversation with the person that says, it feels like things have been off in the last month. What's going on, right? So the difference is, what we often do, again, avoidant drift, right, is we go, ooh, that feels uncomfortable. I don't want to have that conversation. So I'm just going to continue on, put that on autopilot, focus my energy elsewhere. And guess what? If it's a real issue, if it's a real problem, a year later, you're in a much worse place than you were had you addressed it at that moment. Yeah.
So when direction is lost, what does that typically look like then in real life or business? What does that look like to normal people?
I think it looks like a lot of things. So it could look like prosperity, from a financial perspective, overlooking all of the little bad decisions that accumulate. And then suddenly it's like, how did the credit card get to this point? How did my savings account get depleted, right? That would be that incremental type of drift where suddenly you look and you say, holy moly, it's going to take a lot of work to dig myself out of this compared to early signs and signals. It's the relationship again, that lost feeling and where you end up depends on how quickly the awareness comes. For me, I drink my own champagne. I use the 7-minute pivot. And one of the things I realized is I've become a little bit of a hermit. I work from home. I travel periodically for work, but I live in a town that is predominantly a vacation town. So people are, really here mostly in the summertime. If I'm not intentional about my relationships, I can spend a lot of time alone. And on one hand, you might go, well, you're a competent introvert, you maybe that's okay. But it does reach a point where suddenly you wake up and go, gosh, I haven't been out of the house in 2 weeks. I even have my groceries delivered. I haven't, I'm lonely. And so that's where it's like, when does that awareness happen? If you have a discipline around just checking in on the daily. The other thing it does, Mark, I just want to say this, and why 7 minutes, not only is it doable, but some people sort of live in the mess. They want to just sort of churn in the mess all day long, and you're kind of glass half empty people, right? This gives you 7 minutes and the timer goes off and it's like, okay, move on with your day. Go get going. For those of us, like how I would describe myself, that I don't want to sit in the mess, I'd much rather shove things under the rug and live in happy. It forces me for 7 minutes a day to take a really hard look at where am I pouring my energy? How does it feel? And do I need to be a little more aware and take a little more control over my destiny?
Yeah, because if I'm sitting there the second day and I'm not having the same reflection possibly the day before, then maybe I was just stuck in a bad season, as they call it, and I haven't started to drift as such, and I just to pick myself up. So it's a great tip, because everybody turns around and says, I ain't got time to do this type of thing. I haven't got time to change my life because I need to go to work and that takes all my energy. So what you're saying there is achievable, isn't it, for everybody? So now I've identified my 5 areas where the drift tends to show up. Which of those areas do you see most often with people you work with? What are those areas that you come across all the time?
This is a bit of a generalization, but it is backed in research. So I want to suggest for the person listening that says that's not me, there always are exceptions to data, but I will tell you, for women, and I'll speak to our fabulous male counterparts in a moment. For women, they tend to drift most in the area of potential, which is that whole career and living in self-actualizing. And the reason is they often, statistically, and we studied 5 race ethnicities, 4 countries. We looked at this on a global scale and a broad range of ages. They tend to pour into everyone else, right? So they're nurturing relationships, they're taking care of others, et cetera. And they're sort of putting their career, their aspirations on a back burner. I'll get to it when the kids go off to school, when the significant other gets their dream job, et cetera. Women, by and large, tend to drift most in really their full potential, which connects to their prosperity, right? Because if you're not being intentional about your career, assuming you're a career person, it has financial implications. You're not getting the compounding income, the raises, et cetera. Men tend to be the opposite of that, which is men tend to drift most in the relational aspects. They're very busy and very intentional about their careers, about building wealth, about providing, taking care of their families from a financial perspective, but can be so poured in to those things that they sort of put their relationships on autopilot. And that we know the statistic today is 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women. And I have to think that there's some relationship, I won't call it a correlation, but some relationship between are we investing the same amount of time and energy in nurturing those relationships and not allowing those to drift as we are our careers?
Yeah, I would say definitely not. Yeah, but do you think that there's certain areas then that people notice first while others stay hidden a bit longer? Is there anything that, or do you feel that that's been covered already? It's just what it is, male and female different.
Yeah, I think male and female is the big difference, but I think secondarily to that, it's super individual. I mean, I think that there's a lot of triggers and things in our own formation and growth. Perhaps our well-being is something that we're not terribly mindful of, that we, just are not conscientious about our mental and physical health. There's people that's just not on their radar until it needs to be, until they have the heart attack or they have, diabetes or something of that nature. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I guess all these years I haven't paid any attention to my physical health, or they're suffering from deep depression or some, mental health issues. So I think it's very dependent on the person beyond kind of those broad
Do
generalizations.
you think that's like a chain reaction? Do you think that the drift in one area of life starts affecting everything else, or do you think they're all separate
No,
issues?
I think they can be very related. I think that they have tentacles, right? So, but they don't often show up at the same time. So I just did a post recently about, for a long time, I was pouring everything into my prosperity, my potential, health, and I had a great career. I was making really nice money. I oh, and my purpose, and I was doing what I loved, right? So those three areas were, I had that down in spades. There were moments I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 41 years old, which is very young onset for breast cancer. The doctors, because I didn't have any of the genetic markers, believed that stress was potentially a contributing factor. While my relationship with my kids was always strong, if I was being honest with myself, I stayed in a marriage longer than probably was healthy for everyone because I could just distract myself with these other three areas. And again, from the outside, it looked great. But yeah, they all feed into one another. And when you're miserable at work, of course, it affects your physical and mental health. And it can affect your relationships because maybe you're a little more, you know, snarky and tightly wound because things aren't going well at work. I mean, or if you're feeling like, you've gained 30 pounds and your confidence starts to decrease because you're not feeling good about yourself. How does that then show up in your confidence at work, your confidence in your relationship? So yes, I think that it's sort of all boats lift together.
Yeah.
But it's never about balance, right, Mark? I mean, for the person listening that goes, it seems impossible to keep all five things sort of in
Yeah.
balance. I think of it like a balance board. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those balance boards that sort of round and they sort of teeter. It's about shifting your energy to keep them in as much equilibrium.
As you can.
Yeah. I mean, we're
And if the
human.
people listening, you've mentioned, so as people listening to this, what should they be paying attention to in their own life right now? What should they be doing?
Yeah, I love that you asked. So I'm gonna put a plug. It's free on my website. I have a stop drifting diagnostic survey. It literally takes less than 10 minutes. You download it for free, and it walks you through three questions, I believe, in each of the five dimensions of human flourishing. And you're gonna know right away in that few minutes where you're knocking it out of the park and putting a lot of your energy, and maybe where you're not putting nearly as much energy. And then that's a real personal, that's part of your 7-minute pivot. It's like, okay, I haven't been in the gym in a year, or I have let my friendships and my relationships really coast, and I feel bad about that. Or, for some people it's I haven't been to church, or I no longer know my true north in terms of what am I really here for? What's my purpose in this life, right?
So we'll put that link here. That will be useful. All the links and everything, how people can get hold of that, will be in the chat, and all the socials as well. So let's talk about, the cost of the drift. We talked about people, personally and professionally. I think, have you seen it cost leaders in terms of relationships, confidence, and health? You've mentioned that, or purpose. But can drift affect organisations in the same way it affects individuals?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you moved in that direction, because that's a big part of the work I do as well, is working with leaders and with companies. It gets back to your earlier point about burnout, right? It gets defined as burnout. So that's what it gets named. We have turnover, or attrition rather. We have attrition because of burnout. And part of that is really where the leader can show up and check in. The leader can show up and check in terms of, how well do you feel like you're bringing your gifts and talents to work every day? How much are we leveraging what you love to do and what you're great at in this role? What more could we do or supplement to give you more opportunity to do that? Obviously, we're careful about asking super personal things like, how's your love life and whatnot. But just being available to individuals to check in, particularly around those things that the leader has access to helping control. And for women that work for and with you, I would say so many are conditioned not to put their aspirations into the universe. So I would say to every leader listening, particularly with your female, but with all of your employees, what are your aspirations? What is your next? What is your next? What is the timeline you'd like to see that happen by? We often are afraid to ask that question, because the first thing leaders will say is, well, what if Mark wants to be a vice president and that's not going to happen at this organization? That's okay. Wouldn't you rather have that conversation than let Mark stew about that and ultimately leave? I would.
Yeah.
I'd rather have the conversation and say, tell me what about that excites you. Let's talk about what that might look like in your development. I don't know when that would happen here, but let's put you on a path for growth. So I think for leaders, oftentimes it looks and sounds like burnout and churn, but what it really is women often will take their ball and go elsewhere quietly. For men that work with you, they're often putting their aspirations out there. They tend to be a bit more confident about that, but asking, how are they managing sort of work-life integration? How are they feeling about sort of the wholeness of their life? The hours they're working, the time that they're traveling, et cetera. How can we make that such that they feel as though they're getting, and I don't call it balance on purpose, but that integration feels manageable. And two, what are their aspirations? What does their timeline look like? How do I help develop and support them? Because otherwise what happens is we churn and we have all of this attrition, and we don't understand it. We just assume that people are working long hours and there's too much on their plate, rather than maybe we have the wrong person in the wrong job.
Yeah, so I was going to ask that question about, in business, what happens when teams or leaders, they start drifting without realising it. But you kind of semi-answered that. So is there a client story or personal example, perhaps, where the cost of the drift became impossible to ignore, or there was bigger consequences that you had to identify or help with, or maybe a personal thing yourself?
Yeah. Well, I don't So I'll give an example of someone I worked with years ago first, because I think it creates a lot of clarity. I had a woman who worked for me, and she was doing an average job, right? She wasn't knocking my socks off. She wasn't going above and beyond. She kind of clocked in and clocked out, and did the minimum standard of the job, which indicated to me she doesn't love this work, right? She didn't show up super passionate about what she was doing. And so I had the conversation with her. I asked her, how are we utilizing your gifts and talents? What is it about the role that you love? What do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing, right? What are your aspirations? And here was a very interesting thing. She wanted to be an esthetician. She was managing the whole relocation for an organization that I was working with. But what she wanted to do is be an esthetician. And so this gets back to start working on your future today. So I said, how do we make that happen for you? Now, recognizing I'm going to lose her, she's ultimately going to leave to go do facials and what have you. But the loyalty and engagement as we sat and navigated, could she go to school part-time? Could I adjust her hours 2 days a week to where she could do that and fulfill that real sense of purpose and potential that she was excited about? I got 2 years more out of this young woman doing a bang-up job, better than ever, before she left and has now for many years become an esthetician. Now, for me as a leader, that's a win. That's a win because
You were part of that journey.
and I got better performance out of her, right? I mean, the human side is I was part of it. She's doing what she loves, and that feels amazing. The business side of it, which I cover a lot of this in my second book, Human Capital Investment Strategy, is I'd rather get 2 years of killer performance and engagement and loyalty and then have her go, rather than 4 years of her phoning it in.
Yeah, I've got a great example of that. There's a guy that I know who owns a company in Ireland called the City Bin Company. And in Ireland, you can choose who comes and collects your rubbish. A bit like you can choose your electricity and your gas in the UK. Whereas in England, I don't get a choice who picks my rubbish up. It's the council or the local authority. But in Ireland, you can choose that. And he realised that he had drivers that were eventually, and people that picked up bins and refuse guys that probably wouldn't want to do that all their life. So he created an academy to train them in the areas they wanted to train in, so they could leave him. Now, everyone looked at it as if it was absolute madness, but what he created was a huge amount of fans, and they're always going to choose him as a bin company, aren't they? Eventually, anyway.
I love
And
that.
then-
Yes.
And if you've got, as a leader, if you've got faith in your own strategy and structure within your business, then you should. One thing that I've always found that leaders find difficult to understand is that people will leave you eventually. There'll be people that'll be there all the time, but there's definitely people that will leave. And if you can do what you've just said there, then as you say, you're going to get so much more out of them, and your business is going to benefit. So it's a great example, really.
That's a brilliant example. I want to share with you too, Mark, because I know the audience is so much about this reinvention, right? After 40, just as maybe a semi-closing story. But when I talk about start working on your future today and drift parallels. So when we wrote Now Near Next, we found that women are not intentional in their career. And what I've done with Stop Drifting is I've taken that and looked at not just career, but everything else. But let me share a very personal example for the folks listening related to the topic of reinvention later in life. 3 years ago, I was the chief administrative officer for the sixth largest Catholic health system in the United States. And very big job, pinnacle of my career. And we were going through a CEO change. And I knew that we were going through a CEO change because one of my disciplines is human resources. And I had been nurturing the whole succession planning process for a decade, knowing that the outgoing CEO had a date certain, et cetera. And I was a little uncomfortable as this was happening, not really sure where I would sort of stack up with the new CEO. There was a little bit of a history there, et cetera. Um, and I was a little bit on rinse and repeat with my job, if I'm being honest. I was, again, it was at the pinnacle of my career. I didn't really have a promotion I was looking for. I had planned to retire from that company in 3 to 5 years. And so I decided to write my first book and with my co-author, Kimberly Rath, and we found this lack of intentionality. So I decided that I'm going to drink my own champagne and I'm going to be intentional about my next. And my next, which I thought would be 3 to 5 years later, was going to be writing, keynoting, coaching, and doing organizational consulting. And so I started putting those pieces in place. My book went into editing. I got the book written. I had my PhD. I got my coaching certification. So I was working on my future today, baby steps, over the course of 18 months. Well, in June of 2023, my position was eliminated without notice. Just, hi, your position's eliminated. Thank you for your 12 and a half years of service. Have a nice life, right? Under this change of control. And had I been simply drifting, waiting to my point of retirement and not working on my future, I would have had one option I was a month before my 56th birthday. I would have been one option, and that option would have been, I got to go find another C-suite level job as a single woman and an empty nester with a non-compete, which meant I would have had to move by myself to go find this big job, which are hard to find to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But because I had not been drifting, because I had this insight from our research, because I was drinking my own champagne and working on my future little by little by little, I chose the second option, which is I'm going to accelerate my encore career and I'm going to go coach and speak and write and do the things I thought I would be doing, in my late 50s, early 60s. But I would not have had that as a viable option had I not been putting forth the momentum. Had I allowed drift to say, I'm going to coast for the next 3 to 5 years in my big job with my big salary, I would have been caught very flat-footed. And so for the person listening, regardless of where you are, if you love your job, if you love your boss, if you work for yourself and everything you love, still, what is your next? What is the date certain you'd like that to be? And start working on your future.
And you've given that framework of that 7-minute pivot, that 7 minutes a day to start that journey without making a massive change to their life, little steps. But I was just interested on that before we move away from that, because that 7-minute pivot is quite, special for you and so the listeners listening. How did that idea come about? What did it just pop in your head, or did you come from experience from previous?
No, kind of the latter kind of popped in my head. So when we were keynoting on the first book, Now Near Next, we had heard and seen a lot of research about 7 minutes. So there's 7-minute workouts and do this for 7, right? A lot of anybody can find 7 minutes, particularly in the nutrition and health and exercise space. And so we kind of started with, listen, initially women, because that was the focus of the first book. Listen, ladies, we get it. You're raising kids, or you've got a spouse, or you've got a busy job, and you're, all the things, but you can find 7 minutes to work on your future. 7 minutes is all we're asking of you, but do it daily. So it started only as spend 7 minutes a day doing something for yourself, sort of nondescript. As I pulled away, and that book was published in 2024, as I've had some space away from that and continued to sort of figure out myself, what I realized is, as human beings, we're unintentional more than in just our career. We're unintentional in all these aspects from time to time. And what if the discipline was more specific than Mark, just go do something for yourself for 7 minutes. What if the discipline was more specific? And so I started researching the neuroscience behind how does the brain work, and the benefit of the 7 minutes and the one small thing. And so it sort of materialized from there.
Yeah, because the discipline side is, you've spoken about it. I don't want to repeat it too much, but I'm glad you've covered that area of actually having something more detailed to think about and direction, rather than, or just go and sit in the corner for 7 minutes and think about life. Because
Right.
the next day, if you're like me and a bit of a procrastinator sometimes in my life and a dreamer, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, we're quite dreamy. We like to think, tomorrow there's be another idea that's better than last
right.
idea. So the discipline around the direction, but can people build more discipline around the direction without becoming overwhelmed by it, do you think?
I think it's like anything, they say it takes 21 days to create a habit, right? So what I invite a lot of the people, what I challenge the folks that I coach, I'm like, do this for me for 21 days. For 21 days, just commit to me that 7 minutes a day, you will follow this practice. And by the way, also on the website for free is the practice. You can download the 7 minute pivot practice so that you've got sort of the worksheet that gives you the prompts to walk you through it. So if you're driving or running or doing multitasking as you're listening to the podcast, that's where you can find it. But what I find is once individuals start with the discipline, creating a discipline around that 7 minutes and making that intentional, it sort of becomes something that sets the day. It becomes very much something that gets very integrated into how they approach the day. I've had people tell me, I had one woman who she's been in a job search for over a year, looking for very specific position in a very specific kinds of industries. And she reached out to me recently and she said, I'm the finalist for 2 companies. And I'll know, sort of within the week, but I went a completely different direction. Using the 7 minute pivot, I realized I wasn't really tapped into what is my sense of purpose. And she said, they happen to be nonprofits that I'm really passionate about. And so it's the same type job, but it's in an industry that makes her heart sing. And so I'm waiting to hear from her, but she was, a finalist in 2 different companies, both in the nonprofit sector. And so she attributed this sort of discipline of her 7 minute pivot of creating this clarity around what is my purpose? What should I be focusing my time on?
And I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people that listen to this, and when I've had some preview showings, people will automatically think that all the experts that come in are trying to say, give up your job and go and start a new company. But it matters that 7 minute framework. It matters for people that want to stay corporate, doesn't it? And want to change direction slightly, just as much as just going to start a business. But
Yes.
to end this part of the conversation before we get on, it's a 2-pronged question, really. What would you say to someone who feels they've left it too late to change course?
Yeah. So it's never too late. You're talking to a woman who got her MBA in her 30s while working a full-time job and raising 2 littles. A woman that got her PhD in her 50s. It's never too late. You may be further off course, right? If you've gained 100 pounds, it's going to take longer to get back to your fighting weight than if you've gained 10. If as soon as the pants felt tight, you got busy with it, it's going to be different than, you're 5 sizes different. But does that mean that you can't get there? Absolutely not. It's one decision every day. It's one small decision every day. And that small decision might be, I'm not going to drink wine tonight after work. I'm going to reserve those calories. That decision might be, I'm going to sign up for a gym. It could just be signing up, right? If the relationship is broken beyond that, maybe the relationship can't be repaired, but it doesn't mean you can't be repaired. It doesn't mean that you can't move in a positive direction.
So if there's just to move on from this bit, if there's one message you would want people to remember from this conversation we're just having about this, what is it, or what would it be?
It would be stop drifting, use the discipline of direction, and start working on your future today. I would combine those things together.
Okay, great. Well, look, I always have a quick fire round question. So I
Okay.
put people on the spot, one word, one sentence. If you can't answer it, it doesn't matter, but let's just jump in. And because we're talking about direction, one word you associate with direction.
Intentionality.
Okay. One habit that keeps you grounded.
Working out.
Best leadership lesson you've ever learned.
Be inclusive.
A book that has helped or a book that has shaped the way you think.
Think Again by Adam Grant.
Okay. Morning person or night thinker?
Morning, 100%.
I'm the opposite. What's the one thing high performers need to stop doing?
Taking on volume instead of value. It's not about doing more. It's about really evaluating what is the value that this brings to you in addition to others.
Okay. And then the final one, in one sentence or whatever, what does success mean to you now?
Being fully authentic. Being fully authentic, because I feel, I'm going to elaborate just a little. As a woman in a corporate environment for 35 years, for the most part, the only woman, and for a long time, the youngest, maybe not toward the end. I lived in a lot of my headspace. I was all about data, evidence, facts, figures. That's how I showed up to be able to feel credible in that space. And as I've pulled away from that, I'm recognizing that your heart and your authenticity and your vulnerability are where you connect with people at a deeper level. And so I think it's bringing all of that. That's success to me.
Well, Cynthia, I feel I can call you Cynthia now because I think we know each other a little bit better. This has been such a powerful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think that what really lands is that people don't suddenly wake up lost. It happens gradually. I think we all have to, and often quietly, as you've said there, but the encouraging part is the direction can also be reclaimed in a small, intentional moments. That 7-minute framework that you spoke about, people need to go, and I'm going to look at that. I think it's a great tool to use. So thank you for sharing your insight, your framework, and all your practical wisdom that you've gained over the years. I think that's what we're trying to achieve here. So let's have a final plug for you. Where's the best place that people can find you? Again, where can they get Stop Drifting, your book? And where can they learn a bit more by the 7-minute pivot?
Everything is available on my website, and it's dr-cynthia.com. So pretty easy, dr-cynthia.com. And then connect with me on LinkedIn. I take that very seriously. That's a place where my professional relationships have been developing, and I would love to follow what you're doing, and you can follow all the work as it continues to evolve.
I would love to. So, just wrapping up, this episode is really about helping listeners, as we said, recognise that feeling off is often not failure, it's a drift. And drift can be corrected with awareness, honesty, and small intention. So remember, you're not finished yet, and I really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you very much. Lovely. Hopefully that.
Thanks so much for listening to Not Finished Yet. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Please see the links to all our socials. Until next time, remember, you're not finished yet.